Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our How to Create and Use Key Third-Party Risk Management Metrics webinar. My name is Jessie Redmond, and I will be your host. On your screen, you should see multiple widgets that you can use, including Ask Question, Media Player, Slides, Related Content, Speaker Bio, Request Demo, and Help. If you're unfamiliar with our webinars, all the widget boxes are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to maximize your screen space. At the bottom of your screen in the toolbar are icon buttons you can use to show and hide the widgets. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner of the widget. If you experience any issues or have technical questions, you can use the Help widget or submit them along with any other questions through the Ask Question widget. Don't worry, we do capture all questions throughout the session. We will be answering some during the webcast, but those that we do not have a chance to answer live, we will address with you via email. Today's live session is eligible for 1 CPE credit. If you wish to receive this credit, please remember to answer all of the polling questions that will appear on your screen during today's presentation. You will also be sent a follow-up survey link 24 hours after the live session that will need to be completed in order to receive the CPE credit. With us today, we have Hillary Dewhurst, Venminder's Head of Third-Party Risk Education and Advocacy. She will discuss practical instruction for identifying and refining your third-party risk management program metrics and teach you how those metrics can demonstrate your program's effectiveness and efficiency. You will see a link to a copy of today's slide deck, a link to our website, a link to our samples library, links to our Understanding Vendor Performance Metrics and Scorecards ebook, and scorecard template, our How to Develop Metrics in Your Third-Party Risk Management Program infographic, our 6 third-party risk management reports to maintain infographic, as well as a link to our library of additional resources, all within the Related Content widget. With all that being said, I would like to hand it over to Hillary. Hillary, the floor is yours.
Well, welcome everyone. Today we are going to start off by talking about what to measure in your third-party risk management program. Then we're going to jump into the different types of metrics and the right type of metrics you want to consider when building out your reports. We'll go through some samples and how to get the data, and then we'll dive into how to really tell the right story with those metrics to get support. And then we'll walk away with some key takeaways and Q&A. So let's jump in. So if you're joining today and you're curious about why we should be creating metrics that measure the health of the third-party risk management program, keep in mind that these are designed to really inform your senior management and the board about what's going on, if things are working as they're intended to or not. They should be used to drive action or decisions and give your program better visibility. They also help support regulatory compliance, identify gaps or weaknesses in your program, and they can be used to show vendor risk across the whole portfolio of vendors. They can be used for other things like supporting requests for extra resources or alerting your organization to potential findings. And they can also be used to illustrate the successes or challenges that your program is having at any given time. So what are metrics exactly? Well, they're a form of measurement, and we can use them to determine how healthy and effective our programs are. But keep in mind that we use different types of metrics for different purposes. We're going to talk about 2 different types of metrics. The first one is key performance indicators versus key risk indicators. And we're also going to talk about objective versus subjective metrics. All right, so when it comes to KPIs or key performance indicators, they're going to help us measure the performance of the risk management program and to help us determine how well we're meeting our achieving strategic goals and objectives. Keep in mind that a KPI is always a backward-looking measure. So it's looking at something that has already occurred. We also can call this a lagging indicator. But when we look at KPIs, They're most often used to make reactive business decisions, right? Or responding to something that's already taken place. Some KPIs examples include, percentage of vendor engagements that are in compliance with the program requirements, percentage of vendor owners that have been trained, how many process exceptions you have, audit findings, business interrupting events, etc. Now, on the other hand, we have our key risk indicators, or KRIs. And just like it sounds, they're used to indicate risk and warn us in advance to prevent something from happening or risk from getting worse. It's always a forward-looking indicator. We also call them leading indicators, and they're used to make proactive business decisions, right? We're going to do something before something else happens. Some examples might include, how many vendors are past due for their risk review, or the number of vendors with missing security patch management, right? Or even the number of vendors with access to PII. We could also measure things like how many single point of failure vendors we have, or how many critical vendors we have. All of those can be good key risk indicators. Now, both KPIs and KRIs come in one of two flavors. So the first one is objective or quantitative metrics, right? We use a root word quantitative like quantity. That means it's something that can be counted or measured. And this metric is always based on data, facts, and established criteria with reliable outputs, right? So we always use these numbers and the outputs are unchanging. Some examples include, number of high-risk vendors, percentage of critical vendors, percentage of vendors meeting SLAs. Now, in contrast, we have subjective or qualitative metrics, quality being the key word here, something that can be observed, experienced, or felt, right? So when we're looking at these kind of metrics, we're really thinking more about opinions, impressions, feelings, or judgments. The outputs can vary a lot, and they can also change depending on the perspective of the individual. So my judgment might be one thing on a day when I'm in a good mood. It might change when I'm in a bad mood. But some examples might include stakeholder satisfaction, how easy it is to use your third-party risk management system, or how useful the reporting is. Now, when it comes to figuring out which are the right metrics for your program, let's start with the life cycle here, because as a practice, the life cycle has many interdependent processes and tasks. And within these three stages, onboarding, ongoing, and offboarding, there are 10 major activities and many individual tasks that can be measured as part of your third-party risk management metrics. Now, starting off with the activities in the life cycle is great, but there may be other things we want to consider as well. So maybe we want to think about internal compliance or the timeliness and quality of those vendor owner deliverables. Maybe we want to consider how efficient our processes are and what our throughput is. How good is our resource capacity? So all of these things might be other indicators of how healthy our program is as well. Now, I can practically hear some of you thinking about all the potential metrics that you could go out and measure. But keep in mind that more data does not always equate to better information. We want to be really thoughtful about the metrics we choose because we need to really establish if the third-party risk management program is living up to the organization's goals and objectives. So we do need to take time out to identify those good metrics, and we also need to think about the data source as being available and reliable before we start throwing everything together. So while you're thinking about that and your gears are turning, let's take a short break for our first poll question. Jessie?
And this brings us to the first poll question of the day. You should see the poll question now in the slides area. If you have any issues, please feel free to send us a message using the Ask Question widget, and we will be happy to assist. As a reminder, if you wish to receive the CPE credit for today's session, you must answer all poll questions and be in attendance for the entire live session. This poll question is, has your organization developed any third-party risk management program metrics? Yes, no, but we are planning on it, no, or you're not sure. Hillary, we have some time to answer one of the questions that has come in so far from the audience.
Great.
And that question is, since subjective metrics aren't data-based, why would we want to use them in our third-party risk management program metrics?
You know, that's a really great question, but it kind of boils down to there are some things that you can't measure with like sets of data. So, for example, how your internal stakeholders feel about a certain process, right? Some may think it's easy, some may think it's difficult based on their own experiences. And even though we can't sort of normalize that data, we still want to reflect it because it can help drive decisions. So for example, if the majority of our users think our third-party risk management program is easy to use, then we would probably leave it as it is and kind of go work on an individual basis. Whereas if everybody thinks it's difficult, then we know we need to do something different. So there is a place for, you know, kind of feelings-based metrics in your program. They just shouldn't make up the majority of your metrics. I hope that helps.
Thanks, everyone, for answering that poll question. Here are those results. By the way, you may have noticed reactions such as a thumbs up or heart coming across the screen. If you find this feature distracting, you can turn it off by clicking the 4 arrows in the top right-hand corner of the slides widget, which will expand the slides to full screen and no longer show the reactions. Also, before we move on, in the related content widget, you will find a helpful resource to reference. It's our Understanding Vendor Performance Metrics and Scorecards ebook and scorecard template. With that, Hillary, back to you.
All right, so how in the heck do we identify which metrics are the best ones? Well, we've come up with a little 10-step approach to help you identify your best TPRM program metrics. Now, we'll go through these in details, but just really quickly. The first thing is we're going to identify the corporate goals and objectives for the program. Then we're going to prioritize the goals and objectives in order of importance. We're going to select the top 3 to 5. And for each objective, we're going to identify life cycle activities, program requirements, or other components that we're going to measure. We're going to prioritize components of order of importance. From there, we're going to select the top 3 to 5. Those will be our metrics. You see how this is working here? From there, we're going to test the data and all of our calculations. We're going to establish the right thresholds. Then we're going to go in and review it with our stakeholders and make revisions when necessary. So let's dive into each one of these. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to think about why our organization has a third-party risk management program. What are the top reasons for this? What are those drivers? And these can vary by organization. So let's look at a few potential ones. You know, your organization wants good regulatory compliance, or they want to really mitigate vendor risk. You know, maybe it's about strategic vendor selection and use, or vendor performance and value. It could be internal process compliance, or business continuity and disaster recovery, cybersecurity, etc. Whatever it is, write them all down. Now, once you've got that list, you're going to put them in order from most important to least important. And we're going to select the top 3 to 5. Now, I'm going to tell you we're not going to do more than this right now because this is something we can build upon later. So to get started, you know, I've put a list together of what my imaginary organization would value. So regulatory compliance, mitigating vendor risk, cybersecurity, vendor performance value, business continuity, etc. So put them in order. Pick your top 3 to 5. Now that you've got your list of 3 to 5 together, you're going to start thinking about all the possible metrics for each area. So we're going to go through a few samples here. So for compliance, Regulatory and internal compliance, maybe our metrics are going to be how many critical vendors have current risk reviews, or how many vendors are out of compliance with the program. Maybe we're looking at internal program compliance failures or even customer complaints. The next area, mitigating vendor risk. So maybe we want to look at inherent risk versus residual risk for our critical and high-risk vendors. Maybe we want to look at the total number of vendors we have by risk rating, past due vendor issues, or third-party risks that are identified and monitored. Okay, and for vendor performance and value, maybe we want to look at vendors who are meeting or exceeding their SLAs, critical and high-risk vendors with regular business performance reviews, vendors with tested BCDR plans, or vendors not meeting SLAs. So you also, during this process, want to think about where you're going to find your metrics. So obviously, we have all those activities in the vendor or third-party risk management lifecycle we could look at, all the activities in planning, risk assessments, contracting, due diligence, performance management, etc. But we also have program operations, so that might be your vendor owner training, issue management, capacity and throughput, if your team is meeting internal SLAs, or your resource capacity. We also could look at program governance. So how often are we reviewing and updating the policy? How are we managing issues and escalations? Do we have audit or exam findings? Internal program compliance and board reporting. And then finally, there's program risk management. So how many risks are identified? Did we miss the boat on anything? Were we not able to avoid some risk? How about new and emerging risk, or the impact of risk? The number of engagements that we're rejecting because due diligence is effective. So I think you get the idea here. Now we also want to think about where we're going to get the data. So one of the big places, hopefully we all have them, is our third-party risk management system. But we also might be looking at data outside that system, maybe our AP system, maybe there's an issue management and tracking system that's part of your enterprise risk management tool. InfoSec might have some tools and reporting, your contract management systems, customer complaint logs, your audit or exam reports, benchmarking surveys and reports, or even stakeholder satisfaction surveys can all be great data sources. So we also have to consider some other things while we're putting together a metrics. One is those data sources. Are they reliable? And do you have access to them? Are you going to be overly dependent on someone else to give you that report? Because if so, that could be a barrier. We also want to make sure that the metric is easy to calculate. So for example, if you're drawing 3 different data sources out of 3 different systems and you have to download them into an Excel spreadsheet and then do a series of really complicated calculations or formulas, that's not very accessible and it's not always repeatable. So think twice before you're going into those very complex calculations. It's also good question to ask with everything. Is this a better KPI? So is it a good lagging indicator? Does it show how we've performed? Or is this something that's going to be a good leading indicator and help us manage risk as a KPI? We also need to know what we're going to do or what action is taken when the metrics are beyond their acceptable thresholds. And then finally, is this the right metric to help us tell the story? All right, over the next few slides, we're going to look at some examples for different types of metrics. Keep in mind that these are just suggestions or examples. You can come up with your own. You can use these. It's just to really get your mind thinking about what might work. And you also may see the same metrics show up on multiple slides, and that's because sometimes metrics can help us tell more than one story, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So for operational metrics, we might look at our stakeholder satisfaction score, how well are we remediating issues within a time frame, how long is it taking us to complete a vendor risk assessment, we might want to look at the percentage of engagements that are risk rated and that have completed due diligence or current due diligence. How many of our vendor owners have been trained? How many issues did we discover during our risk assessments that need remediation? And, how are our vendors doing with turning in their documentation on time? You also might think of the number of vendors by risk rating. All right, moving on. Maybe we've selected compliance as one of our major objectives. So here are some examples. Percentage of engagements that are compliant with the policy, or the number of vendor compliance incidents. Maybe we want to look at the number of engagements with current risk reassessment, or the number of audit or exam findings. Another really important one is internal business unit compliance. So I think you're kind of seeing the trend here of what kind of metrics we might be looking at. All right, so maybe risk management was one of your objectives. So here are some examples you might use. The percentage of critical vendors, how many single point of failure vendors do we have, maybe the ratio of third-party risk management employees to vendors rated moderate and above, because if we have more vendors than we can handle, that's a risk issue. Maybe we want to look at the percentage of issues that were not remediated within a specific time frame, or the percentage of inherent risk assessments that were inaccurate. So I think you're starting to get a feel for what you might be looking for. And while you're thinking through that a little bit more, it is time for our second poll question. Jessie?
Our second poll question of the day is, the board and senior management are informed and actively engaged with our third-party risk management program. Yes, somewhat, no, or I don't know. Hillary, I have another question here that we can answer.
Great.
And this question is, would regulatory changes be an example of a compliance metric? And if so, how might we structure that metric? What should we measure?
So that is a really good question because, of course, regulatory guidance and stuff is updated. You could actually have a metric to say, have there been material regulatory changes? Yes, no. But that's probably not as helpful as if there has been a change, what percentage are you towards compliance, for example? So if there's a pretty material change and you guys have 8 or 9 months of work to make the process changes to be in compliance, I would measure that progress. That's probably going to be more helpful for the board and the risk committee and senior management to really weigh in and see if, there's problems, do you need extra resources, what's kind of the holdup. So I would really structure that as, your pathway towards compliance, whether that's activities that are completed or percentage of completion, whatever works for you. But that's the way I would do it. I hope that helps.
Thanks so much, Hillary. Please get those responses in soon. We will be closing the poll question out in just about 10 seconds. Thank you. Thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to answer the poll. Here are the results. I would like to quickly direct your attention to the related content widget, where you will find our How to Develop Metrics in Your Third-Party Risk Management Program infographic. This handy resource walks you through the basics of developing these metrics in your third-party risk management program. Okay, Hillary, let's continue with the presentation.
All right, so let's take a look at what the best use for any specific metric might be. Now, keep in mind, one metric can help us tell different stories, but we do want to really think through that. So in this example, we're thinking about due diligence because due diligence is so fundamental to what we do as third-party risk management professionals, and we might want to think about how many due diligence reviews resulted in a no-go decision. Now, this could be a KRI, and it could support that vendor risk objective. But the story we're trying to tell here is that we are demonstrating risk avoidance and that we have operational effectiveness, right? Because if the number is too low, maybe our process isn't strict enough. Another metric might be how many due diligence reviews are in process and on time. This could be a KPI or a KRI, and it could help us measure governance and oversight. It demonstrates proper and timely oversight, but if too many reviews are lagging, it could mean that additional resources are necessary. So due diligence reviews with satisfactory and regulatory compliance controls, that can be a KPI that's showing regulatory compliance. It validates the requirements that we have as an organization and that we extend to our vendors. But we also want to think about, is the data reportable, and are we capturing the ratings for each risk domain? Another metric example might be that of risk reviews. So we might be looking at the percentage of reviews that are completed on time. That could be a KPI to help us demonstrate regulatory compliance and operational effectiveness, right? Is the data reportable in our system, right? Is this something that we're actually tracking? Do we, put a timestamp on it? And are there other factors that can cause those delays that third-party risk management has no control over? If so, that may not be the best metric. The percentage of risk reviews completed on time as a KRI, maybe we're looking at that from the perspective of when we don't complete these on time, that increases the likelihood of an event. And we would probably want to ask the next question, if we're seeing that number be really high, like, what is the root cause of these delayed reviews? Is it vendor documentation? We don't have internal SMEs? What's going on there? Okay, touching base on some operational metrics, so vendor owner training, right? So we want to make sure that the people responsible for performing specific tasks and activities know how to do it. So we want to look at the percentage of vendor owners that are trained. This might be a good KPI because it helps us support vendor performance of value. And the story we're trying to tell is that we have qualified people doing the work and that operationally we're effective because we train the people to do it. Again, is this something that's easily reported? Can we get that data? Using the same metric, we could look at this as a KRI, supporting risk management, because vendor owners who aren't trained increase the risk of regulatory noncompliance and other risks, right? So this could be something we use to help push people to get that training done. But we do want to consider, if that training is easily accessible, and is there a mandate for vendor owners to complete the training? Let's look at some operational metrics, and this one, issue management, right? This is a biggie. So I have listed the first one as percentage of issues closed on time. This is a KPI. It's going to help us demonstrate operational effectiveness and risk management. But again, we need to make sure we can get that data easily. And we also need to make sure we understand what third-party risk management role and ability to influence getting those issues closed. So how much can we influence that? We also might use the same metric as a KRI to support risk management, because that tells the story that risks are mitigated appropriately and on time. Again, are issues updated frequently enough? Would we have that right schedule to give us good reporting to support that metric? And how often are we running that report? Is that weekly? Is that monthly, et cetera? We also want to look at the number of open issues that are escalated to senior management, right? Because this tells us when we've kind of hit that breaking point. That's a great KRI, and it really supports a governance and oversight metric. Because if there's too many issues requiring escalation, that means that our process isn't working. But we do need to know how closely issues are tracked and monitored and what steps we're taking before we escalate. Now, in this last example, we're going to look at program capacity, right? So we're going to look at the number of third-party risk management team members to the number of vendors that are risk rated as moderate or above. We're going to use this as a KRI, and we're going to do it as a KRI for our compliance objective, because if we don't have enough resources, compliance might be at risk. But we do need to have some established risk thresholds here. So for example, maybe we say for every 200 vendors that are rated moderate above, there has to be one full-time TPRM member. Or we might look at the number of critical and high-risk vendors versus the same time last year, right? Also a KRI. But this one can support operational effectiveness and efficiency, because if we're seeing a significant increase in those elevated risk vendors, this could slow down our ability to get through important processes like due diligence and risk reviews in a timely fashion. So we also might want to think, if we're going down that level, if we have any secondary metrics can validate our concerns. So, you know, do we know how many of those due diligence or risk reviews are at risk of being late or past due? So, okay, giving you a lot to think about. So let's check into why your metrics should always be a mix of KPIs and KRIs. So when you're first starting out, you just doing your metrics for your program reporting for the first time, at a minimum, we need to demonstrate that the program is working as intended. So we are going to have those KPIs. But really, the value of this type of reporting is not just demonstrating what we've already done and reacting to that, but to really use these metrics to drive good risk management, right? So we want to look at, you know, what are the risks of the program not performing as it needs to for whatever reason, and we're doing that at the program level, not the vendor level. Remember, KPIs confirm that the program has performed as you need it to, and KRIs are going to provide actionable data to prevent risks from occurring or worsening. Now, in the past, when I've been developing program metrics, I had a little nifty trick that I want to share with you. And this is for every KPI, train, identify, and associated KRI. And we want to be able to articulate the rationale for each metric, right? So if the metric is percentage of engagements that are risk rated, well, from an operational perspective, you know, that KPI rationale is going to be, oh, we can show that we're operating effectively, we're complying with the policy, and that we have good program compliance. But from that key risk indicator perspective, we know that when engagements aren't risk rated, the higher percentage of those that aren't, that we have a higher likelihood for business interrupting events, audit or exam findings, reputational damage, and financial loss. So you can see how you can pick out a performance indicator and then think about the risk indicator. Do that for every metric when possible. Now, your metrics are only going to be effective if you have a defined threshold or a limit, right? Because if we're outside those acceptable limits, then we have to take action. So, for example, if the metric is percentage of critical vendors, we might say that of our vendors rated moderate and above, critical vendors should account for no more than 15% of that total population. Now, that's just a number. Don't ask me where I got it. I'm just using it as an example. You don't have to follow that particular percentage. Percentage of risk reviews completed on time. So maybe we say 97% of our risk reviews for vendors rated high or critical have to be completed on time. If they aren't, then we do root cause analysis, we outsource reviews, whatever it takes to get back in that acceptable threshold. Maybe the ratio of third-party risk management team members to the number of vendors rated moderate and above is 1 to 200. So for every 200 vendors that are moderate and above, we have at least one full-time employee. If we get beyond that, we need to get some contracting help, we need to outsource, we need to do something. The percentage of vendor owners trained within 30 days of their employment start, or from 30 days when they get that first vendor assignment, We need 98% of all new vendors completing the training on time. If that isn't happening, what action are we going to take? So I think you understand what you need there. Okay, so we do know that one of the primary reasons we're developing these metrics is to share with our board and our senior leadership. Now, we should be doing this at least once a year, if not more often. But as we're putting these things together, we're all preparing to give this information to the board. Here are some things that are real life challenges, right? We've got that data that's too hard to get or interpret, right? We don't have access to that system. We are dependent on someone to give us this report, and they never respond, whatever it is. We might have too many data points, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier. I'm pulling from this system and getting this. I'm pulling from this system and getting that, and now I'm going to mash it up all together, and I have to do these big calculations. That can be a really big problem. Another big problem is the metric isn't really telling us a compelling story. It's kind of what is the so what with the metric. So if you think back into our little grids, we were talking about what the rationale is. Why are we picking that metric? If that story isn't very compelling, it's probably not the right metric. The other problem is the metric isn't actionable. So let's use that example a few slides back where we talked about vendor documentation being late. If there's no way for you as a third-party risk management professional to influence that, and it's going to unnecessarily ding your program, we might want to consider a different data attribute or metric that would tell the story we're trying to get to. And the other thing is if that metric isn't measuring the right data dimensions. So maybe we're looking at percentages when we need to be counting, or we need to look at all the things that aren't in compliance versus those that are. So again, we really have to think through all of this information and tackle some of those challenges before we start putting it all together for our stakeholders. Okay, so we've gone through this big process. We've identified our top organizational objectives for third-party risk management. We've identified some metrics. We've kind of figured out what story we want to tell and if it's going to be a KPI or a KRI. And we're feeling pretty good about it, but what do we do now? Well, the next thing we need to do is test the data and the calculations. We want to make sure that it's repeatable and reliable. Okay, we want to make sure that we don't get crazy inputs and outputs every time we're trying to do the reporting. So test your data. Review the story you're trying to tell. And if it's not obvious to you, sit down with someone who doesn't know anything about third-party risk management and show them what you're doing. See if it makes sense to them. Listen to their questions. Maybe sometimes we get too close to the forest to see the trees, as they say, but we do need to make sure we're telling compelling stories and we're telling the right story, because we want to make sure those stories are emphasizing that the program is doing what it's supposed to do and that we are using this data to help manage risk. Once you have that information, review your final proposed metrics with key stakeholders and your management. Let them do another pass at it, and then you may need to do some revisions. Now, I know after you put in a lot of that work to hear you may need to change it. It can be a little frustrating, but remember the objective is to get the best metric reporting possible. So that feedback and those initial impressions are really important to reach that objective. Now, while you think about that, it is time for our very last poll today. Jessie?
Our next poll question is, our organization measures and reports internal compliance with third-party risk management requirements. Yes, we're in development. No, or you're not sure. Hillary, let's go ahead and answer another question from the audience.
All right.
How should third-party risk management program metrics integrate with enterprise risk metrics?
Well, a lot of that will depend on your actual enterprise risk management program and what they're tracking. There's probably going to be some similar metrics around issue management and remediation. There'll probably be some harmonized metrics around, risk appetite. But you really do need to sit down with your enterprise risk management team as part of developing your metrics to really start there. What is it that they need to report up? Because ultimately they're responsible for reporting risk sort of at the organizational level. So you will have your own separate metrics. Not everything needs to be in alignment, but do start with them. Ask what it is that they need to report and how to structure that metric so that you're not trying to redo the math or, put a round peg in a square hole when it comes time to reporting. I hope that helps.
Thanks so much, Hillary. Just a reminder, if you have any issues submitting the poll answers, please feel free to send us a message via the Ask Question widget, and we will be happy to assist. Also remember, if you wish to receive the CPE credit for this session today, you must answer all poll questions on the screen and be in attendance for the entire live session. We will be closing this poll momentarily. Thank you. Here are those results. Thank you, everyone, for answering this question. I'd like to mention that you will find our 6 third-party risk management reports to maintain infographic in the related content widget. As we briefly discussed board and senior leadership reporting, you may find this resource helpful if you'd like to learn more. Hillary, I'll pass it back to you.
By now, some of you might be feeling a little overwhelmed. We've given you so much information, so many things to think about. But how do we keep moving forward? So the first thing I want to tell you is to limit your initial metrics. Really do not do more than 3 to 5 per objective. The reason for this is this process will evolve over time. People will come back, they'll ask questions, you may determine that we need to start measuring something else, and you don't want to have to completely recreate the wheel every time you get a suggestion or a request for a change. So keep it pretty limited until the process is more sussed out. The other thing is don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Some things are really obvious. They make sense to measure it. But over time, after a few of these reports, you might be seeing where there's a gap in the data, or, hey, we could add a metric that would really tell this story a little bit better. It's always just better to get started, get that ball rolling, and refine it over time than just not deliver anything because you're in search of the perfect set of metrics and reporting. Another way that you can really add value to the process is consult with your other internal risk domains. If you have a team that does any kind of reporting, say compliance reporting, or even your cybersecurity folks, go out and talk to them. What kind of metrics are they using? What things are effective for them? Really go out and leverage the expertise of your other risk domains. And then, yes, always stay open to that feedback and constructive criticism, right? Because this is not a simple process, and it is going to have to evolve over time. Also, your stakeholders, the ones that are seeing this information, especially your management and your board, we need them to be able to make decisions and act off of this information. So what they think matters. Now, the next obvious question is, how do we format it? What should it look like? And I'm going to tell you, quite honestly, that is completely up to your organization, right? If you already have a team that does some sort of reporting, maybe like governance reporting for the board reports, go in and talk to them. They may have templates. They may have some ideas about how to lay it all out, because ideally, you want to fit this on a single page or less. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but that's really why we want to limit how many metrics we're looking at. Remember, more data doesn't equal better information. So there's 2 ways to kind of do this, basically. The one is a scorecard format, where you putting in a single page. Maybe you're using a color coding system, the red, amber, green. That can help the viewer always quickly identify where things are beyond risk limits or at risk. And we can use a lot of cool charts and graphs if we want to do that. Some organizations really leverage more visual representations of data. But if your organization's not like that, you can still do it in a spreadsheet format. Again, try and use a single page. Use color coding, because we do want people to be drawn to the things that we want them to pay attention to, especially things that are at risk, past due, etc. Make sure that you clearly call out all data using good section and column headers, right? We don't want anyone to be confused. And again, if you're using a spreadsheet version, have someone do a snicker test before it gets to your management or to the board. And you just want to make sure that it's clear and easy to comprehend. Now, the last part of this process is to determine how we're going to officially report this information and how often. So once we have all of our metrics finalized and we've assembled them into that format, whether that's the dashboard or the spreadsheet, we need to think about who is going to get it and how often. So first of all, how often really determines on that stakeholder group. So at a minimum, your stakeholder group should include your board of directors and senior management. Your board of directors should get this information at a minimum of once a year. Senior management more frequently, and you can discuss with them what makes sense. The other place they should be is your risk committees. Okay, they need to help you manage risk. So if you can demonstrate that internal compliance is really low, a risk committee generally has the right people at the table to help you remediate that. So that can be delivered to them maybe quarterly or more frequently if there's a big issue. Make sure that people know when to expect this information. So, you need to establish the right schedule and frequency, publish that, and when it's available, send it out in a note, make a note of where it's posted so they know to go look at it. All right, we have covered so much today, and I hope everyone has been able to kind of keep up and that this information has been useful for you. So let's wrap up with some key takeaways today. Again, begin with your organizational objectives. That's the top of the waterfall. We're going to work from there. Limit the number of metrics in the beginning to 3 to 5 per objective, because you can always add more as you go to refine them. But I guarantee you the first couple of reviews of this information, you will be making adjustments. Use both key performance indicators and key risk indicators for the optimal information, right? So we want to show how we've done, and we want to help manage risk. Track the trends of both your KPIs and your KRIs over time, right? This can really help, especially if you're making continuous improvement every cycle. You want to be able to show that. Remember, a number is only valuable if you have something to compare it to, okay? Test your data and your calculations, not just at the beginning, but periodically. Systems change. Somebody changes one field header, it could throw everything off. So just check in once in a while, especially if the outputs are looking significantly different than they have in the past. Get that stakeholder feedback. Get it throughout this process, because ultimately we're using this information to inform decisions and drive action. And be clear about what you're going to do when the metrics exceed the acceptable thresholds. You might want to have an action plan that accompanies each one that says, these are the actions we'll take. That kind of preparation can really help your board say, yes, this is the right thing to do, and we can track that those actions were taken and how successful they were. And then always include program metrics in that annual reporting to the board at least once a year. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm going to turn it back over to Jessie for some information and some more Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Hillary. Before we dive into more questions and answers, I would like to thank everyone for attending. I would also like to thank Hillary for her time and sharing some important information. On your screen now, you will see our upcoming webinars. On November 28th, our How to Manage Vendor Issues and Challenges webinar. And on December 5th, our Regulatory Riddle or Common Sense, Decoding Third-Party Risk Regulatory Perspectives, Themes, and Expectations webinar. We hope you'll be able to join us for those sessions. A link to register for those is in your copy of today's presentation slides. Let's now go ahead and answer some more questions that have come in during this session. Okay, Hillary, the next question is, what is the industry average ratio of number of FTEs, third-party risk management members, to number of vendors?
Okay, well, the key word there would be industry average because we have a lot of industries on the phone. And I've seen a lot of similar questions pop up in the chat about that figure I used about having one full-time employee for every 200 vendors that are rated moderate and above. So first of all, I want to say that was an example of a threshold. But yes, VMminder in particular has made some recommendations about what amount of third-party risk management, full-time people you need based on the size of your program, especially those vendors that are rated moderate and above because they are the ones where we do all this work. We're not doing as much work. We're not doing a lot of due diligence and performance management on low-risk vendors. So if you have, say, for example, 200 vendors that are rated moderate and above, then you need at least one person. And generally speaking, up to about 300 to 400, it's somewhere around 2 can handle it. But once we get beyond that, we're talking about enough volume where we're doing that many risk reviews. We're pushing that much, communication, gathering inherent risk assessments, making sure all the steps in the life cycle are completed. So it really does become incremental, and we do need the appropriate resources to handle that. Now, how many resources you need really depends on a couple things. One is how automated your programs are. Some organization that's using totally manual processes like multiple spreadsheets, they're just going to need more people because it takes longer, it's more error prone. But if you've been able to automate some things, you standardize things like your risk assessment, your due diligence requirements, then you can do more than less. The important thing here is that as part of your program metrics, you really try and establish what is sort of the upper threshold of when your team cannot handle any more work. What is sort of the breaking point? Now, we use 200 as an example, but it's really up to your organization, how mature the program is, how automated it is, et cetera, and how much work your team's actually doing. So I hope that clears that up for everyone.
That's great. Thanks, Hillary. Next question. With a team of only 2, which KPI or KRIs are most feasible to implement in our third-party risk management program?
Well, I think it's less important about how many people you have as how much access to data you have and how easy it is to crunch those numbers. So for example, if you have a really great third-party risk management system and you have a lot of reporting you can easily pull from, you can go ahead and do 15 to 20 metrics. Now, to start off, like I said, don't do too many. Think about those top 3 to 5 reasons, and for each reason, we want to have 3 to 5 metrics. That's going to top us out, somewhere around 20 for most organizations, and that's plenty. But if you do not have the resources or the data to easily get that information, I just start with 1 metric for each objective. I hope that helps.
Great. Next question. Is there an ideal number of KPIs and KRIs to have?
Again, it's really up to your organization. But if you're just starting out, I do like to really recommend to keep it more on the minimal side, because as this information is communicated and people start digesting it, you're going to get questions. You may be asked, how can we illustrate this particular aspect of vendor risk management, and that might require new metrics. But really, to start off, I think keeping it 20 and lower is really a good way, as long as you're kind of looking at it from different dimensions, like operational, risk management, et cetera. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Hillary. Next question here. Should assessments be standardized, or is subjective assessments okay?
Well, if we're talking about risk assessments, which I hope we are, all your risk assessments should be standardized, right? They should not be subjective at all, because what we want to do is we want to be able to make sure that we're accurately identifying the risk so that we can manage it appropriately. So if one occasion the risk is rated as high, and then maybe later someone else looking at that is only rating that risk as moderate, we potentially have some gaps. So risk assessments should always be standardized, at least in the terms of the questions they're asking. Especially for your vendors, like what kind of documentation we'll accept. But yes, try and standardize those as much as possible.
Great. Our next question. Do regulators require third-party risk management program metrics?
They do not. But the important thing to remember here is that the regulators do expect that you're going to have board involvement. They do expect that you're providing good actionable data to the board. So it serves to reason that providing data that's in the form of a metric so the board can easily tell if something's within the threshold is appropriate. But there's no specific regulation that says you have to have these metrics.
Great. Next question. Should the board approve the metrics we are using to measure program health?
That's really at your organization's discretion. I would always invite them into that conversation, and before you finalize anything, give them the proposed metrics just to see if they can interpret them, if it's answering their concerns. The board really does need to be able to supervise the effectiveness of the program at the organization. And if something's not working, they need to be able to take action. So I think that discussion is really important before you finalize anything. But, the board isn't necessarily going to come up with those metrics for you, so I always suggest bringing some perspective metrics to them and asking for their thoughts.
Great. Thanks so much, Hillary. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have left for questions today. Thank you, Hillary, for taking the time to address some of those that came in. Any questions we did not have time to answer today, we will address offline. We would like to thank you all for attending and hope you found today's session valuable. A big thank you to Hillary for her time and great content. You can ask even more questions inside of our third-party think tank, an online community that is dedicated to third-party risk professionals and free to join. Just because today's session has ended doesn't mean the conversations and questions must. Post your questions at thirdpartythinktank.com and see what your peers have to say. In the community, you'll find thousands of free educational resources, including ones related to third-party risk management program metrics. If you'd like to become a member of Third Party Think Tank, you can register on the site or shoot us an email and we will get you registered and send you a link to set your password. We did record today's session, and that recording link will be provided to you in a follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow afternoon. Also in that follow-up email will be the survey link for you to request the CPE credit. On behalf of VenMinder, it has been a pleasure. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.